All right, hello again. This is Jeff Scott of Blackhawk Technical College. I've been going over the PowerPoint presentations from Murox MySQL 2nd edition for the 152-147 Relational Database Development online class for the spring 2016 semester at Blackhawk Technical College. We've gone through the first 17 of 19 chapters, and it's time to go on now and go into Chapter 18, which starts in the text on page 493, and it's on how to secure a database. When you use MySQL in a production environment, you must configure security to prevent misuse of data. So again, this is the kind of thing that would matter more, not for us because we all have our own single copies of this. All right, but in this chapter we do learn about security and how to write MySQL statements to create users that have restricted access to a database. Again, there is some stuff in here towards the end of the chapter that is on the MySQL workbench, which I'm not going to go over. So we have to know how to create both admin users and end users, and how to grant privileges, how to distinguish between admin privileges and object privileges, describe what a user can do with select, update, insert, delete, and execute privileges, distinguish between the 4 different types of privilege levels, and describe how to use MySQL to grant tables. All right, so we've got some examples here. All right, what you see in this example here is we've got a script that contains SQL statements used to create 2 users and grant them privileges. The script starts with a create user statement that creates the 2 users. Those 2 users are named AP admin and AP user. And although it's very contrived, they both have the password PA55WORD. After these users are created, the grant statements, as you can see here, are used. All right, the AP admin is granted all privileges on the AP database. In other words, they can select, insert, update, and delete data from database tables. The AP user can only select, insert, update, and delete data in the AP database. If you want to view the privileges for a user, you can use the show grants statement. And there's an example of that right there. All right, privileges for working with data. I mean, most of these should be pretty self-evident. Select allows you to view data but not change it. Insert allows you to insert data into tables. Update to update table data. Delete to delete table data. And execute allows you to execute a stored procedure or function. So a user can also have privileges to modify the definition of a database. All right, they allow the user to do different DDL or data definition language statements, like create to create a database or table, alter, typically for altering a table, drop to drop a database or a table, index to create or drop an index, create views, create routines, which allowed you to create stored procedures or functions, alter routines to alter or drop a stored procedure or function, triggers to create and drop triggers, and events to create, alter, drop, or view a database event. So the privileges a user has to work with a database control the operations that they can perform on the database. All right, typically, when you're working with a database, you typically, privileges for working with the data are typically given to all users of the database, including end users. That's for working with the data, so that's a select type of thing. Privileges for modifying the structure of a database are typically given to database administrators and programmers. So administrative privileges are things, as it says there, like create users, which would allow you to create new user accounts. Reload, which will allow you to reload tables that store privileges for users after they've been modified. In other words, to do a refresh. Show databases, to show all the names of the databases on the server. Shutdown, to shut down the server. All right. So the privileges that we talked about earlier, the create, etc., the select, insert, update, delete, and execute, those are typically referred to as object privileges because they allow the user to create and work with database objects like tables, views, and stored procedures. Administrative privileges allow a user to create new accounts, shut down a server, reload tables, etc. And those are the ones we just mentioned. All right. Now, there are a couple other privileges that you can see down towards the middle of this slide. The all privilege grants privileges available at the specified level, except the grant option. So the grant option allows a user to grant his or her privileges to other users. There's also a usage option, which can be used to modify existing accounts without changing the privileges for that account. There is a show privileges statement that can be used here to show and take a look at whatever privileges the user currently has. And speaking of privileges, there are 4 privilege levels. There's global privileges, which are all databases and all tables. Database privileges, which are all tables in a specified database. Table privileges, which are all records or all columns in a specified table in a specified database. And column, which is only a specified column or columns in a table in a specified database. So the global privileges provide user access to everything. The database just to a specific database, a table just to a specific table, and columns just to a specific field in a table. So to store user and privilege information, MySQL uses the grant tables in an internal database named MySQL. All right, that is one of the databases that gets created for you by default when you set up your MySQL account. When you grant users access to the databases on a server, typically what you want to do is restrict all users other than admin users from accessing the MySQL database. All right, that's because it has, if they have that, they can change user or privilege information, and you don't want that to happen. All right, just a couple of syntactical things here. You see in the first example, you know how you can create a user. And there's different ways that you can create a user. As they mentioned there, when you create a user and you put an @ sign in there, basically what you're saying is the user has to connect just from that host. Whereas if you leave it off, all right, then what you're saying is the user can connect from any host, whether it's localhost or not a local host. All right, you may have to rename a user to change the name of the user. Maybe you spelled it wrong. Maybe they want to be referred to as something else. You can drop a user. When you drop a user, it deletes their user accounts and their privileges from that MySQL database. In this first example that you see on the screen right here, it shows the account name for a user named John. All right, and you notice in this case, for example, they use quotation marks, but you really don't even have to. All right. Localhost can also be specified as 127.0.0.1. All right, that's the IP address of the current machine, so that'll work also. So if you want to specify the host the user can connect from, you can code the username, followed by an @ sign, followed by the host name. If you specify it without a host name, MySQL automatically uses a percent sign as a wildcard character to allow the user to connect from any host. All right. Next is the grant statement on page 506. They mention on the top of the page here, in general, it's a good practice to create a user, to use the create user statement to create users in the grant to grant privileges. However, you can use the grant statement also to create users and grant privileges in a single statement. All right. But again, just because you can do that doesn't mean that you should do that. All right. So there are examples on pages 507 and 508 and 507 on this. All right. When you're done granting or you're done revoking privileges, you may want to view the privileges that have been granted to make sure you've granted the correct privileges. To do that, you can do a select statement like this. Once you know the names of the users and the hosts, you can use the show grant statement to show the privileges for that particular user. And here is for a particular user at a particular host. And this is more generic right here, which just shows the privileges for whatever the current user is. All right, not only do you maybe want to create privileges, you might want to revoke privileges. All right. In the first example here, you revoke all privileges from user Jim. In the next example, it's like the first one, but it revokes all privileges from two different users, so it has to be comma separated. You can also revoke specific privileges if you want to do that. So notice in this case, from AP, from Joel at localhost on the AP invoices table, you are revoking update and delete privileges. You might need to or have to change passwords. So you're shown here how to do this. Now, one thing, and I've been chastised by some of my colleagues for this, how can you let everybody use root and not change passwords and set up usernames? Setting up the username is fairly trivial. But when I used to try to do that, people would set up usernames for themselves and they'd either forget the username or they'd forget the password they set up. And there's no way of retrieving it if you forget it or if you lose it. All right. Okay. A couple more things in here on using MySQL Workbench, and that's pretty much it for Chapter 18. So I'm going to come back in a few minutes with the last chapter, how to back up and restore a database, which is Chapter 19. So I will be back with that chapter shortly.